Tensions between the U.S. and China are rising, and Silicon Valley is feeling the effects. A new article in the Wall Street Journal titled "Chinese Cash That Powered Silicon Valley is Suddenly Toxic" takes a closer look at U.S. startups and their relationship with Chinese investors. This comes as the Trump administration cracks down on China's involvement in U.S. intellectual property and as the trade war intensifies. Wall Street Journal reporter Rolfe Winkler wrote that article, and he's with us now from San Francisco. So thanks for being with us. What role has China?
Morning, Vlad.
How are you doing?
Well, it's early on the West Coast.
I'm happy to be
here.
Yeah, I appreciate you getting up for us. So let me ask you this. What role has China played in Silicon Valley? Until recently, what were some of those examples that you cited in your piece?
Well, a few years ago, a much larger role, because Chinese companies were very interested, partly at the behest of the government, to try and invest more in high technology. This is important for China's Made in 2025 plan. They want to be out ahead of the world in lots of technologies, including things like artificial intelligence. So they wanted to come to the United States to invest in startups and try to get their foot into some of those technologies. But that's changed as the view of China in Washington has changed.
So how has that view changed? Because they are reducing their footprint now.
They are now as a result of the U.S. government bringing pressure. The view that's changed is basically the Trump administration came in, and China is now viewed more as a rival than as a country we should trade freely with. It doesn't matter that maybe we don't get the same reciprocity with, for instance, an open market over there, because China's going to liberalize. That hasn't happened the way U.S. forecasters thought it might. Now people view China more as a rival, and if they can obtain technology, if they can get out ahead of us in some of these ways, they can establish maybe they can undercut the U.S.'s economic and military superiority. That's something the U.S. government's concerned about. So they have brought more policies to bear to try and, I guess, nip technology investment in the bud so the Chinese can't obtain it.
So, Rolfe, the U.S. startups are rejecting money from China, but are they also rejecting ideas or the exchange of ideas as well?
That's hard to say. I think they don't necessarily get a lot of ideas from China necessarily. Startups don't. What they're really looking for, a lot of the best ideas come from the United States. Silicon Valley is a very innovative place. They're really looking for capital. And while there's no real shortage of capital in the United States, in Silicon Valley, a few $1 billion is not nothing when you're talking about a lot of early stage startups. Some of those struggle to get money. And when Chinese capital gets cut off, some of those companies can and do struggle.
Right. So I guess the question then becomes, what impact do we expect this to have on America's ability to compete on technology? If some of these U.S. startups are looking for the kind of money that we're talking about here, there's only, I guess in the U.S., there's only so much money that can go into some of the startups, and it's perhaps why they were seeking money from outside U.S. sources.
That's a great question, Vlad. It's hard to say because really a lot of the startups that don't get the funding they would want are at the earliest stages. And that's the stage at which it's almost impossible to predict whether their technology is going to become something very significant long term. But the reason it's important to think about is because, look at your iPhone. What makes it possible in a big way is flash memory. You can't put a hard drive in that. Flash memory is a technology that's been developed over 40 years. And some of those technologies, would you have predicted the iPhone 30, 40 years ago when flash memory was being developed? You wouldn't. But so who knows what we could get out of some of these tiny startups and some of these guys in their garages. You really can't know. What you can say is that the butterfly effect, if you will, can have a big impact in a place like Silicon Valley over a long enough arc of time.
So what about the other way around? I mean, there's got to be opportunities if you are a venture capitalist here in the United States that look attractive to you in China.
I think, yes. And I don't know if American investors are having the same issue with access in China. Most of them tend to focus they're investing here in the United States. To the extent they have Chinese investment, they often open a local affiliate, Sequoia China for Sequoia Capital, very, very large, but kind of sealed off over there. They do most of their investing over there. I don't think they're necessarily losing their access as a result of the trade war. I think the thing to keep in mind, though, is if you start closing off markets, you just never know kind of what the impact is going to be downstream. On the other hand, if you're the government, if you're some of these senators and the FBI and all these other people that are charged with trying to protect American intellectual property, if you see what they see, the rampant stealing that they say is out there coming from China, you really start to understand why something has to be done.
Yeah, it's a fascinating article that you wrote for the Journal, Rolfe, and I think that it's going to be just sort of interesting for a lot of people to understand how this is going to play out, as you point out, that butterfly effect, that we really don't know ultimately what the repercussions will be. But really interesting. Thank you so much, Rolfe. We appreciate it as always, my friend.
Thank you, Vlad.